Just a quick one. If you've come here to watch the recording of me and George, then unfortunately it didn't work. So on this episode, we have the audio only. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to No Man is an Island, a podcast powered by Men's Therapy Hub, which is a directory of male therapists for male clients. And today's big question is going to be, what happens when you challenge the long-held narratives around men and boys issues? To talk about that and much else aside, I'm joined by George from TheTinMen. So TheTinMen is a platform that advocates to change the narrative around societal issues that impact men and boys. And I think it's right, George, you describe yourself as evidence-based, unapologetic activism. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll try my best to be those things.
Okay.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Great. And I mean, that all sounds pretty good so far, but as always in the gender space, there are detractors. And some will say that what TheTinMen is doing at the very least is contentious. And at the other end, there are those that say what George is doing is downright offensive. So as a result of that, you'll notice that I'm only using George's first name because he doesn't share his surname publicly. And that's in large part because you don't want your personal life to be affected.
Partly, yes. But I mean, you could quite easily find out who I am if you really want to. But also, yes, I just don't want to be the face. I didn't do this to have my face like splattered around the internet. I just wanted to share information that I felt was useful. If you go on most influencer, if that's what I am, most influencers' profile on Instagram, it's just photos of their own face most of the time, just a grid of their own face. Now, you won't see that on my page, and I only reluctantly put up reels of me, but for many years, it was just facts. And yeah, a lot of people don't like the facts, and I've learned that often what's right and what's popular are seldom the same, but I try to concern myself with what's objectively right. I try to talk about things that are objectively bad, like men in abusive relationships, boys being behind in school, men ending their own lives. Those are things that are objective numerical facts that are bad. Yeah, I don't get much hate. I mean, I'm not like getting a barrage of bricks through my window or dog shit on my doorstep. I get wall to wall appreciation. So I don't put your violin away if you think I'm some sort of martyr, because I'm not.
I admire that approach because it is taking stock of the reality of the situation, I guess, would be one way to describe it. But also, you're being quite boundaried by saying, I don't want to be the face of it. What I do want to do is, this really caught my eye. And it was actually reading this that made me really want to reach out to you to do this episode. So I'm going to read some of your own words back to you that you posted on LinkedIn a few weeks back. It's a little long, so bear with me. So you wrote, to talk about gender equality, particularly as a man, is to walk a tiny tightrope, strung high above a swamp of crocodiles who are all too happy to eat you if you fall. Like all swamps, gender equality is muddled, impossible to dissect or see beyond, and hides great pitfalls that the overconfident or the foolish fall down. Despite these challenges, people want simple, straightforward, tweetable answers where there are none. Others grasp for ammunition or hand grenades to throw at the other side without rhyme or reason. It is, of course, not an easy place to tread, especially when so many quietly want you to slip and fall into the snapping jaws of those patiently waiting below. All of that said, the first question we ask on this show is, how did you end up in this space? Which I do want you to answer, but given that that's what you've written, I also want to know why, because you have chosen the path of much resistance.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing about this space, is that everyone in this space, almost with certainty, that they're not here for a quick buck, because there are no quick bucks to be earned here. Like, you are going to get, I don't know, I'm not, obviously I said I don't get threats of violence, but it's not easy either. There are easier ways to become well known or rich, so it isn't that. And also, I want to say that I don't write those things about being on a tightrope with people wanting me to fall into the snapping jaws of crocodiles with anger. I appreciate the scrutiny I put under. I have people going through every single pixel of my posts with a fine-tooth comb, adding up the numbers, going through the sources, making sure what I'm saying is absolutely right to a decimal place. And I appreciate that, because that's made my content so much better. It's watertight because it has to be watertight. And I often just copy and paste information from reputable sources and present it back to people. And I've had to work really, really hard to make sure that is accurate. Whereas other people on the so-called other side, they are given a lot more grace than I am. They're accepted at face value. And I do find that frustrating when I'll present like a meta-analysis of hundreds of papers captured across decades by world-leading experts, and people still don't believe me. And then someone will present a pixelated tweet they've screen grabbed on their phone, and then everyone's convinced that they're the ones that are right. But why did I start? Because I felt like someone needed to. I went on a journey myself of I wouldn't, if I'd found my own page 5 years ago, I would be as offended as I'm sure most people are. I was very much into the belief against what I'm saying. And TinMen is sort of the journey I've been on of realization of my own uncomfortable facts that I've then presented back to people. It started off basically just, I wanted an arsenal of information and facts in the palm of my hand, under the table, quite literally. So when I'm talking to people in the progressive spaces that I call home on the left, I can talk with information that is accurate and modern and responsible. And I never thought people would follow me, but people clearly have, because clearly other conversations are happening on other tables and other facts are being held under those tables. So it was mainly just an archive of information for myself, and now people appreciate that. And then I've brought into my creative skill sets, because I work in the creative industry primarily as a filmmaker, but across all different mediums. And I've tried to bring a sense of production value and grace and just visual quality and understanding of creative strategy to this obviously very contentious area of advocacy, because that's what I felt was missing. Like, I would read the facts, like men's health worse than women's in every area, boys behind in education in every country in the West. I would see millions of men in abusive relationships without help. And those were, in my opinion, indisputable facts that just needed presenting in the right way by someone like myself. And then I thought someone like me would find the cheat code to unlock people's compassion for men and boys. And I'll be honest, I don't think I have. I actually am disappointed. I thought surely just a little bit of work from someone like myself, so self-aggrandizing, would blow up. I was just like, I
Been
am what's
there.
needed. I was like, I am what
Yes.
is required. I will pull the sword of Excalibur from the stone
Mm.
that no one else has been able to do. And I haven't.
Yeah.
And that's more interesting. Like, I've become increasingly more interested and alarmed, not by boys being behind in education, but by people's reluctance to talk about it and to insist the opposite often. So yeah, it's an interesting lifelong struggle that I'm excited to be in, a set of creative challenges that I've worked in this industry for nearly 20 years now. I've never struggled this much. I've done so much more with way less for my clients. And yet I feel like I've been dealt a royal flush as a creative in this space. And every time I try to put the cards down, nothing seems to change. So it's
Yeah.
intriguing.
That continual belief of, okay, this brilliant like witticism that I've come up with, or I've found the statistic that's going to unlock the compassion for men and boys. And when I present this to people, they will go, oh, okay, we have been wrong.
Mm.
Yeah, I remember vividly the first ever talk I did nearly 10 years ago now, when my old book came out, and I left that talk, like tail between my legs, like, what just happened? Neither the men nor the women in the room liked me. Nobody liked me. And that's where part of my respect for what you're doing is that, well, I wonder if you do see it this way, that what you are doing is still considered to be contentious, as I said in the opening.
It is, but less so. But the thing is, as the world catches up with what I'm saying and becomes comfortable with it, I've just gone further into the vanguard. Like, a lot of people are swimming around in the shallow end, I think, and I'm happy they are. But I've just been heading off into the deep end the whole time. So, I mean, I did a lot more in the earlier days of, like, softening my words and rounding off my edges and, asking for penance and apology. Most podcasts start off with some sort of like spluttering of some sort of disclaimer, typically about women and girls. And I don't do that, apart from obviously now, because I don't think we need to or should. I think boys and men deserve this in their own right and are deserving of it. And I also don't think it works Like I've often, whenever I see like an advert for like McDonald's and they'll say, this is 100% beef, I'm like, well, I assumed it was. And you saying it's 100% beef now makes me doubt the integrity of the burger. So me continually having to say, I care about women and girls, I feel like only someone that's sexist should say that. Like it's the classic, I'm not racist, but, which is like the classic four words of an actual racist. But I would rather people judge me by my actions and my content. And I don't think you can judge it as being anti-women. And no, of course I'm not anti-women. And I don't think I should have to say that. And any time spent saying that, as I am now, is time not spent talking about what is important in terms of boys and men, or at least what is important to me.
Actually, if you look at your content, you're very clearly not anti-women, because that is something that is very clear to somebody who works in this space. However, I guess what I do want to ask is, you recently asked your Instagram followers to explain why they don't share your content, because I guess the underlying narrative or the understanding there is that in some way your content can still be seen to be anti-women. So can you tell us about that exercise? Because I read I kind of read your report on it and I found it
Well, yeah, I
fascinating.
mean, I polled my audience on Instagram, and this was a couple of years ago, so it's probably changed for the better now. But I asked, have you seen content on my page that you've agreed with, but haven't shared specifically because you're afraid? So something you otherwise would have shared, but are too afraid to. And I think it's 81% said yes. So more than 4 and 5 of my followers. I'm starting the handicap of like 4 times. Like I'm losing 80% of my following in many ways because they're too afraid and they otherwise would have shared it. So that's obviously a disadvantage. If I were to show you every single piece of data ever presented by the CDC's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey over 15 years, and we're talking samples of maybe 50,000 Americans captured by a non-partisan government organization, the CDC, and it shows every single time in all surveys that men and women are equally violent in relationships. That is obviously unpopular.
With who?
With
Though?
anyone that is convinced themselves that women are a particular certain way. And the most counterintuitive thing for me is I feel like what I'm doing is presenting true autonomy for women. Like autonomy for women is to do either good or bad, either brilliant things or criminal things, and everything in between that is what autonomy is. But people seem to think that women are only capable of great things, and they certainly are. But they're also capable of bad, and they're also capable of violence and intimate partner violence like that. So yeah, people seem to think that in that case, intimate partner violence is a gendered issue and it's men who are overwhelmingly the ones doing it. But a lot of the data, such as the CDC data, finds that's not true. Or at least it's a lot more complicated than that. So yes, it's unpopular to talk about these things. I mean, I've been looking at some data from Australia. I'll just read it right now, actually. And it finds that 45% of abuse victims in Australia are men. And it finds that another study found that in Australia, again, 26.4% of Australian men admitted to sexual violence, which is obviously a huge problem and is an epidemic. But then 17.7% of Australian women admitted to perpetrating sexual violence. So that's a difference of 8%, slightly more. And no one talks about that at all. So obviously, in that case, male violence is greater, but it's not so much greater that we can just ignore female violence altogether. So I did another visualization of intimate partner violence yesterday that found that in high school, universities and colleges, women are 2.5 times more likely to perpetrate unilateral violence than men are against women. So female violence, unilateral violence in universities is 2.5 times greater than male violence. And like that is obviously horrendously unpopular. And that's why I find it so interesting in a dispassionate point of view as a creative. Like, how do I present this shit sandwich so people eat it down? And I've tried to have my very best. I've tried to keep it like really, really objective. I'm presenting all the citations and sources, very easy to access. So you can check it for yourself. And I present source after source after source. Like that was like a meta-analysis of thousands of people. And like I said, it's still not enough because people don't want to present that. People don't want to share the fact that in that case, women in university are 2.5 times more likely to perpetrate intimate unilateral violence than men, because it's not what we believe and not what we've been taught. And ultimately, it's embarrassing in some senses that we've believed a lie for so long, and we've made that lie part of our fundamental identity in many ways. I've always thought about it as like having food between your teeth for your entire life, and you finally find out that you've been walking around this way, and it's embarrassing.
Is it a lie specifically?
Well, it's not the complete truth.
Right. Okay. So it's an omittance of the whole evidence. It is, I think, and I'm maybe paraphrasing you here, but what you're talking about is selective presenting of evidence. It is, yes, you are presenting the violence against women and girls. However, in the same study, you are not presenting the evidence from the other side. Or in fact, I shouldn't even say the other side, right? I should just say the additional evidence that shows that men are also victims too.
Mm,
Because a lot of your work seems to be the yes and
mm.
approach. It's not the no but. It's not saying, you're not kind of anti-feminist, as we spoke before. You're not anti-women. You are, yes, these issues are real and women do experience them. And here are some issues that affect men and boys too. Can we give those some airtime?
Well, I'm certainly not anti-woman, but I have been very critical of some of the feminist frameworks that have led us down this road that have excluded men in many ways. Some people would call that anti-feminism, but I would just consider it scrutinizing political ideas like I would anyone's political ideas. But no, but the point is that, yes, like I'm happy to show you both halves of that pie chart. If I were to draw you a pie chart of domestic violence in the UK or England and Wales, it would be something like 2.4 million women experience it last year and 1.5 million men, which is about 39% male victims. I'm happy to show you both sides of that, the 2.5 million women and the
And you
1.4 million
do.
and I do. And people are never happy.
Yeah.
People are like, why are you showing us the women? Like, you're making this a competition. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'll just show you the men. And then people be like, well, why are you removing the women? Like, you're just showing us. So people are never happy, but I'm more than happy. My advocacy is not based on erasing the experiences of women and girls. Like, I'm happy to talk about the women that are abused. I think it's obviously horrendous. I feel as strongly about those issues as anyone else or any feminist. But what I'm adding, as you said, and is the other side, or at least the other 38, 39% of that issue. And I don't understand why people are so comfortable just erasing a significant minority of the problem just because they're men. And we're talking about millions of men in that case. We're talking about 1.4 million men being abused in this country this year. I don't know why they shouldn't be part of the conversation. Like, I got into an argument on Reddit, of all places, yesterday, because the government are about to announce an apology for basically killing witches, historically speaking, which is fine. I agree with that. But I know that about 20% of witches killed were men, male witches, whatever they're called. And there's not going to be an apology to them. So I would ask, why are we excluding them? And obviously people get upset. They consider me hijacking the conversation, but ultimately men have a seat on this plane too. Maybe not as many seats as women, but a seat nonetheless. So it's about time we took it and sat down, and without apology, but also about antagonizing the other side. So yeah, like I'm happy to be yes and rather than either or. And I think that's important.
One of the biggest turning points for me was I started out similar to you. I started out very much men need to be better for women. That the advocacy for men was to say we're not good enough, and that's affecting others. That is obviously not my approach now. It is we're not good enough. We're not very good to ourselves, because let's also be honest here, George. Like, we as men, or men in general, are not very good at advocating for
Yeah.
other men.
Yeah, yeah.
That is a place that we struggle big time. But one of the big turning points for me was, and I think I mentioned this in one of my earlier episodes, was I used to sit on panels and I used to talk about male violence. And I would say that it's the violence itself that's the problem. It's not necessarily violence against women and girls, it's the male violence. So let's talk about that, because men are also victims of violence too, and more so than they are women. To which the response was always, yes, but it's mostly men doing the violence. And back then, before I was more learned, I would kind of not know what to respond to that. But now I realize, if we do take the progressive approach, it's just to say, well, that's victim blaming. You are saying that it doesn't matter that men are victims of violence because it's men who are enacting the violence. So if I get punched in the face by some random guy on the street, if that just because that guy is male, somehow I'm
Yeah.
to blame for that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're talking about strange violence, it's about 3 times more likely. And I've read studies where criminals specifically target other men because they don't want to mug or assault women
Yeah, I
because they
saw
feel
that.
bad. And when they have, it's often because a woman's with a man and they feel great shame in having done so. But back to your point, whenever people talk about women just want to get home safe, I'm like, oh, they should want that. And that's totally understandable. But guess what? I want to get home safe too.
And I'm less likely to do so.
But I feel like I'm also hijacking the conversation in many ways because violence on the streets isn't done to people like me. Violence, like all women, it's often gang violence, particularly young black men in
Yeah.
inner cities, not by privileged middle class white men like me who can probably walk the streets with more or less with safety, as can most women. So I don't want to present myself as a victim either. I want to talk about the actual victims, which are, like I said, young black men, particularly gangs, who ultimately have nowhere better to go to and are exploited, are often slaves in many ways, modern slaves, and they are failed often from, again, fatherless homes. There's so much more to say. But going back to your thing like, oh yeah, it's by the men, it's men doing the crimes. I'm like, oh, that doesn't mean anything to the person that's been stabbed. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt or it's not a crime. That provides zero solace whatsoever. And it's the same thought experiment bigotry as black on black crime, where people would try to wave away crime against black men because it was black on black crime, and so that doesn't make it any less important. Like if your priority is to highlight the genitals of the assailant rather than offer sympathy to his victim, then I would argue, what sort of advocacy is that? Like, it should be about protecting people, making sure we all get home safe, rather than endlessly pointing out the gender of those committing the crimes. So, difficult one.
Yeah, it is a difficult one, and I have heard this argument, so I'm going to present it here as a possible pushback. If I walk down the street, I'm 6'3" and too many kilos I'm more kilos than I should be currently, but I'm a pretty big guy, right? Former rugby player. People will be able to think, even though I'm extremely soft, that I can handle myself. To me, walking down the street, even though technically I'm more likely to experience violence, perhaps the threat of violence towards me isn't as impactful on my psyche as it might be for a 5 foot tall, very slight woman. And so, therefore, maybe just the pure statistics don't
Mm.
actually engage us with the reality of the experience of being or living in fear.
I mean,
How would you respond
I
to
think
that?
I'm quite sympathetic towards that, and I think I'm in some agreement with that. But I'm happy to have a conversation about how the impact of violent crime might differ depending on the sex of the victim and like their physical stature or their inability to defend themselves. But we need to have that conversation on the foundation that both men and women are subjected to violent crime. That shouldn't be diminished because you share the same sex with the assailant. But that once we've agreed that and we've come to terms with that, then I'm happy to talk about the impacts. Like people always talk about that in domestic violence. Well, women fear more, women are more often injured. There's some truth to that. And I'm happy to have that conversation, but we need to agree that both men and women can experience these things. And once you've done that, we can have a additional conversation about potentially having different impacts on these, depending on these different things. But we've not even gotten over that first hurdle yet. And I really wish we would.
How do you think we could?
Listening to each other. Like anyone that's still listening to this podcast after 26 minutes should be giving themselves a pat on the back, having made it this far. And you, my friend, are part of the solution in many ways because you've actually not turned off and you've not reported this podcast or left a nasty comment, or maybe you have. But if you're still here and willing to listen to the other side of the coin, then give yourself a pat on the back for being part of that solution. That's more than most people can, I tell you that. And understanding that violence is very complicated. Like people would look at street violence or homicide that is overwhelmingly perpetrated by men, certainly is. No argument there from me. But they move that across and they assume that domestic violence must be the same. It must also be 90% men doing that. And that's not the same because domestic violence and stranger violence are completely different crimes. But I would encourage us to look at the causes of violence. What shapes violent people? What experiences have they gone through? Where have they come from? Like, their gender is not that important, in my opinion. Like, if I were to ask you, what is the single biggest yet least discussed cause of family violence, I don't think you'd name it in 100 guesses. Spanking children, like hitting your children in childhood, like corporal punishment, physical violence against children. That, as described by Murray Strauss, who was the founding father of the field of family violence, who probably was the world's leading expert in the field. He said spanking children is the greatest yet least discussed cause of violence, domestic violence later in life, because you're teaching children that you can use violence to solve or correct
Yeah.
misbehavior.
Yeah.
And I was like, if you're learning that I can hit someone if I don't like what they're doing, and you were taught by that by your parents from the youngest possible age, obviously you're more likely to carry that lesson forwards upon people in your life, such as your partner. But never hear that discussed. You'll never see spanking children talked about. And ironically, I mean, I saw Keir Starmer pledge to halve violence against women last year, and then the following week, he refused to make hitting your child illegal in England. So it's like, how could he possibly say those two things? So stopping violence against children, particularly by parents, is a much better use of our time than endlessly pointing the finger at the other side, because ultimately most men and most women are not violent, and most men and most women are wonderful people and not deserving of any sort of condemnation. So I'd rather treat the problem than this endless gender war between men and women.
The use of the term gender war itself is frustrating. I know why you use it, because that is what it feels like. And yet, having done my research on you, you are also outspoken against a lot of organizations that advocate for men and boys. You are like equally bashing of both sides to say nobody is getting this right. Yeah, not nobody, but these big organizations, and you can name them if you like, but I'm guessing what you're saying a lot is these men and boys, and I have said this, I could have made much more money, and I see people doing it now. If when I was trying to sell my wares of going into businesses to talk about men, what I talk about is the issues that affect men and that men affect. It's both. But I could have made much more money if I'd just done the issues that men affect side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, is that part of your frustration with these big male-led organizations that sometimes they're going for the easy buck, as you said at the start?
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about Movember, we can talk about Movember. I mean, there's lots of criticisms to be leveled at them. And I mean, as a starting point, let's remind ourselves that they are the biggest men's health charity on the planet by a significant margin. They're bigger than everyone else combined. They're like this huge monolith giant with enormous amounts of money that, in my opinion, aren't doing the work they should be doing. We can talk about that in detail. But I mean, I have loads of criticism to be leveled at loads of different people. I'm writing one right now. I'm getting increasingly frustrated, for example, by people talking about male suicide, and then all the work they're doing is that they're just dividing the data by sort of arbitrary lines around demographics. So they'll present data on ethnic groups and male suicide, or they'll present data on age and male suicide. And it's like, I find that relatively interesting, but ultimately not particularly helpful. I'd rather talk about male suicide in terms of what causes it and like what childhood experiences and the environments and external factors and personal stresses that shape suicide, rather than the race of the people who are ending their lives. So there's a lot of criticism to go around. I can be and have been quite critical of certain feminist organizations. And I'm obviously open to myself being criticized. I don't think anything's off the table.
Hmm.
But November, I put under additional level of scrutiny, because they are the ones with the political connections and the money to have real change. Like, ultimately, I'm sat here with my laptop with a few £100 from some very generous Patreons, and that's it. Like, I didn't have anything that, I have none of their political connections, but I feel like I'm doing a lot of the work they should be doing. And a lot of the work they should be doing, by their very name, is men's health, male suicide prevention. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that shape male suicide and a lot of things that are detrimental to men's health are really, really unpopular to talk about. Like, I've recently learned that violence against women has a greater detrimental impact on her health than smoking. and poor diet and illicit drug use. Like, it's horrific. And of course, intimate partner violence is and should be a women's health issue. Now, Movember have refused to talk about violence against men. So here we have the biggest charity in men's health in the world refusing to talk about violence against men, when violence against men could well have a bigger negative impact on a man's health than smoking. So they're not talking about something that's even bigger than smoking or poor diet because, for one reason, it's unpopular. They'll lose some of those political connections and probably some money. But I would say that's a sacrifice worth making because, like I said, there are millions of men whose lives are being immiserated now, right now, because of violence, and they're not being helped, and they're not even being helped by those who could help them and have the funds to help them immediately. So I'm not afraid of throwing a few stones at them. I mean, I also think they've done some great work. They're doing some great work in terms of getting the men's health strategy over the line. And they've done some great work in men's, obviously, like prostate. When it comes to physical health, like body fat, BMI, prostates, they've done some great work because that's all like sort of more politically expedient, more comfortable. They're sort of not quick wins, but no one's going to complain about that. But now comes the ugly work. And part of that ugly work are men who are abused, men who are victims of sexual violence and more. So, yeah, I'm happy to criticize both sides. And that's led me down a road where I'm rather lonely. I find myself alienated from all sides. I just want to keep going.
I have a kind of idiom that my granddad used to say to me, which is play it as it lies. And I guess what you're doing is you are seeing the reality of it and speaking it. But I guess from Movember's perspective, and look, I will agree that Movember, in a therapeutic space, Zach Seidler is already on the slate to do an episode of this. He's the global health director of Movember, and he and his
Say hi to him from me.
I will. He and his research team have done some wonderful stuff in changing the narrative around men's mental health and how to engage men in the therapeutic space. However, what you're
Yeah.
saying is, yeah, but and again, what you
100%, just to be clear,
yeah,
I've read that research work as well. It's amazing. I've posted specifically about that work by Zach. I really, really appreciate it. I admire it. I really respect that work in particular by Zach. I mean, obviously we have some rather fractious fallings out, but that's not to say there aren't things I really respect about him. So there's my olive branch.
But you see, there's
And
the yes and approach again. And I think that's what
yeah,
it's a privilege actually, George, because again, I might not agree with everything that you say. And I hope you experience at least some pushback from me on some of the stuff, because I think that's important. I don't just want to, let's just sit here and stroke each other's whatevers, right? Like this is about having a real conversation. And when I speak with Zach, which I will do, I will be putting to him some of those challenges from you, because they are also some of my beliefs too, which is you have the ball. Like Movember has the ball. Like more than anybody, you have the money and the space. And I wonder if to show the Movember organization as it is some compassion, to say they're able to do amazing research in prostate cancer, in therapy, in weight loss, in all of these areas for men, because they play it as it lies, because they don't try and smash the Overton window. They sit slightly off center in it, but kind of comfortably in the middle of it. And then because they do that and they can get such good funding, then they can do the other deep groundwork that is also impactful. Do you understand that?
yeah, and I understand that, but I'd say a lot of the shifting of this Overton window, which they do benefit from, is down to people such as myself, not obviously just me, but we're the ones that are taking the heat on their behalf to try and shift people's perspective more into this uncomfortable area of advocacy. And I must say, from what I understand behind the scenes, they are coming around to the idea of violence against men and boys
Right.
at Movember. Not fast enough, but I'm going to keep trying to pull them along. And I would say the roles are reversed. They're the ones that have an enormous legal department and millions of pounds in the bank, tens of millions, in fact, to protect themselves. I have nothing. If someone with bad intentions comes after me, I'm not sure what I would do. It's actually quite nerve-wracking. And I don't want my head to be on the chopping block forever. I feel like someone like Movember, they're the ones that should be in my seat. They're the ones that should be leading this charge. And ultimately, their job is to make sure men live long, happy lives. And the things that stop them from doing that are often comfortable. The low-hanging fruit of prostate cancer, etc., have been done great work. But now it's time to go into the garden of the forbidden fruit and talk about what I'm talking about.
This is a risk that you're taking. This is a personal risk. It's a professional risk. You know, you don't use your full name because of the potential pitfalls, as you talked about with the crocodiles. From a personal perspective, do you ever get disheartened? Do you ever get saddened? Do you ever
Yeah,
want to give up?
yeah, all the time. Like, really very close, even recently. Like, I've just had a break for 3 weeks, and loads of reasons why that, and there's definitely a big part of me that's like, "Why am I still doing this?" Like, the end is, I don't even know what the end even looks like, but it's certainly not in sight, and it's never been the angry people that say nasty things about me that deter me. In many ways, they motivate me. It's the people that I considered my allies who just capitulate, who just bow down and are not doing the hard work. Like, I know, I mean, I'm not going to compare myself to Martin Luther King, but his letter from a Birmingham jail is probably the most seminal piece of political literature ever written. And he wrote that the most bewildering thing to him was not the KKK, but the white moderate and those who are just sort of lukewarm acceptance. He said lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright hostility. And if I can take anything from Dr. King, it would be that. And I feel the exact same way. Like, the people that send me stupid DMs, I'll have a little laugh about it and I'll move on. But it's a lukewarm acceptance that is way more bewildering. And I see that from many different people in my space, people that I consider on my side. And yeah, that's what gets me down. Like, there's a set of awards coming out soon, next month, in the men's sector, to give into different organizations and individuals who have done good work in this field. I know people that have nominated me for some awards, and I appreciate that. I didn't ask them to do it, but they have. And that's sponsored by Movember. So I'm not going to go. So I mean, if I do get an award, I won't be there to accept it. So if I get like the award for public awareness, the fact that I'm not even there boycotting the very award itself is like, that sort of represents how I don't feel like I have a home in many ways. I feel like a nomad. I feel ostracized in many ways. And yeah, it has a massive impact on my mental health. And that's why I take breaks and I go away and I just wait for the motivation to come back. And it always does, but it won't forever. People are very happy for me to be out here making trouble, causing, throwing stones at the big charities and rocking the boat. And I'm happy to do that, but it is fucking tiring.
Yeah,
Like,
I know.
it's tiring, and I'm not made of money. Like, I'm not, like, I fund this myself, and it's got a lifetime on it. Let's put it that way. And I don't know how long that is.
I feel you on that, George. I went away after a really harrowing public personal experience, and I had to just reconsider what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, because it is forever bashing your head against it's what feels sometimes like an immovable object.
Mm.
And I say this with, I don't know what the word for it is, but like reluctant to be excited. I don't know what the word. There's probably a German word for it. That there is a shift happening. I had this question in my head to you because I saw in one of your publications recently, I saw a tweet by a guy called Paul Elam. Now, Paul Elam, for those that don't know him, would be like front and center, old school men's rights activist. Like, he is like anti-women, fervently pro-men. Men can't do any wrong. The whole world is a problem because of women. Which, like, no.
Idiot.
Oh, yeah, I did. Well,
I
exactly.
hate him.
He put a tweet up comparing white liberal women to the KKK, and you disagreed with him publicly. But then, as you've just talked about there, so you disagree with like the hardcore men's rights activists. You disagree with some of the work that men's organizations do, not all. You disagree with some feminist organizations, and you recently demanded apologies from a host of female speakers from the past and the way that they'd spoken about men. And you talked there about not having a home. To me, what you are trying to do and what we are trying to do with Men's Therapy Hub, and the great thing about Men's Therapy Hub is that if people say, I don't like it, I can say, okay, do you know that X on your screen? You can just close it. And then you never have to think of us again. If you don't like it, we're not for you. I've had men say, but I don't want to only work with men. And I'm like, that's not what we're saying. there doesn't seem to be a natural home for the men's movement that says the yes and, that says we are supportive of everything that's going on over here, or most of what's going on over here, but we're not supportive of the lack of stuff that's going on over here. That is a long way to ask, where do you figure that you would sit? Because you called yourself left earlier. Are you progressive? Are you liberal? Like, what would be the space that you actually would like to operate in, or that you feel like you do?
Well, I mean, as with every general election in the past 5 years, you will find my ballot screwed up into a ball and stuffed into the ballot box. That's where I am. I mean, I'm a nomad. I don't know who I would vote for, to what side I belong. I mean, I'm naturally left-leaning
Mm.
and a liberal, classical liberal at least. So I just don't know where I am now, and I'm in this space. I guess I am the troublemaker. Like, I don't want to be the troublemaker all the time, but as long as I'm making specific criticisms at certain individuals and organizations rather than just generalized attacks, like Paul Elam, who, let me be clear, is an idiot and a misogynist, who's just saying women are the KKK or worse. Like, that's not helpful. But when I'll criticize feminist organizations or Movember or him, I'll say this is the problem and this is why I think it's a problem. But that's where I want to be, like, unafraid of criticizing people in a way that I hope is constructive and I hope is encouraging of others to hold each other accountable, not for my sake, but for the sake of men and boys most of all, but also women too. And right now that has left me in a lonely place for sure. I mean, I have an enormous community of my own, so wherever I am and wherever it is I belong, I'm going to have to build those four walls in myself, and I have. But I hope in time the things I've said and content I put out will become vindicated in some ways. And I think the people who disagree with me and don't want to talk about male victims of abuse, for example, and don't want to talk about men who are raped or whatever else that is unpopular now, as that becomes more accepted and is adopted into the public lexicon of politics, they will be revealed as having failed men and boys and betrayed them. They will look back at themselves 10 or 20 years from now with shame, I think. And hopefully I will be proud of what I've said. And I will be proud that I did a little bit to raise a flag for the 1.4 million men who are abused in England and Wales, the 50 million men that are abused in America across their lifetime. And although I'll take heat now, I hope in time I'll be vindicated. Like, it is obviously politically uncomfortable to say these things, like, even when they're substantiated by literally hundreds of sources. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And I feel like we have a responsibility to say these things, even if it comes at personal cost, because ultimately, no amount of political discomfort is more important than a man's life. So I remind myself of that. And I know there are many tens of thousands of people that follow me that feel seen by my work, and that their appreciation is way more important to me than any award or any sort of golden handshake or photo opportunity. So I only have to go into my DMs to see that. And I remind myself what I'm motivated by, and that is to help men and boys live longer, happier, healthier lives. And if that comes at some discomfort to myself, then so be it. And I hope more people follow me down that road.
In the disclaimer for the start of this podcast, it says the opinions of the guests are their own and theirs only. We aim to challenge where necessary, right? And I think I've challenged you a little bit on this, but I think it's probably fair to say that it's fairly obvious to listeners that I agree mostly with what you're saying and your approach. Is there ever a time when you think that maybe, I think sometimes that the posts and the way that you approach things could be considered to be abrasive. They're not abrasive to me, because I mostly agree with what you're saying. Do you think that abrasiveness, do you think that approach could actually be putting more people off than engaging them?
Yeah, potentially. Some people. I mean, some people, they even follow me every time I put a post up. I'll see the followers go up or go down. I'm open in many ways, really keen to hear from those people, the people that are like, what you said is problematic, or you're a misogynist or an incel. And I'm like, okay, well, thanks for that. But can you just be specific on what it is I've done or not done or said or not said that you find abrasive? I genuinely want to hear those things. I don't want to just be accused of blanket terms. I want to know, want specific feedback. So hopefully I can learn. Like the Tin Men is a continual journey of learning, but I can only learn from such people if they make a specific point rather than just generic insult, often on my sex life. So I'm in many ways desperate to learn from these people, if only to help me get through to them. But I can't learn from just being insulted or called an incel. I want to know, what am I doing wrong? Or what do you think I could do better? And it would be wildly hypocritical of me to criticize so many people and then not to leave myself open to criticism. And one of the things I want to do on my podcast, I want to talk to people that disagree with me, but not always people want to talk to me. So I feel like I'm stuck here.
This is a question that I've asked every guest so far. If I could give you the keys to the vault and you could have unlimited funding to do anything, where would you start in terms of changing the narratives or changing the statistics around all of the things that you talk about?
Wow, I mean, I talk about so many different things, but if we were to pick a particular subject, I would want to start off by just finding out what the problem is. Like, if we're going to talk about male victims of abuse, I'd want to do a massive survey of those men to find out how many there are, what they need, what their experiences are like. I wouldn't want to just be the one that decides. I don't want to decide what they want. I just want to give them the microphone so they can tell us what they want. For boys being behind in school, I don't want to speak on their behalf or decide where the money goes. The first thing I do is let's do a massive survey on where we are failing boys. So I'd want to sit thousands, tens of thousands of boys down and be like, what don't you like about school? And some people have done that already, and they found out that the things they do like are nothing. The second one was substitute teachers. So when teachers didn't turn up, they like the substitute. And the third one was PE. So pretty dire. But my point is that I don't want to decide what men and boys need. I would like to ask them myself. So the first step would surely be a huge survey, rather than continually speaking on their behalf, which everyone seems to do, because that's always the voice that's missing from the conversation. Like, everyone seems to know what men want and boys need, but we never hear from them themselves. So a massive learning experience, huge. But in things like domestic violence, I would like to recognize that this is not a gendered issue. Although there are gendered elements of it, I would say anyone can be abused. And the way we can reduce that is that we've done that learning experience in many ways. And I would like to go back to childhood. I would like to look at children who experience violence in early life. And I would like to understand that. And I'd like to pour money into support for families. So obviously violence is a lot of it's related to stress and anger and frustration. So I want all parents, particularly in early years, to feel supported and looked after, so they don't resort to violence and they don't repeat the cycle of violence that's destroyed so many millions of lives. And then I'd want to change intervention strategies away from the gendered models we currently have. But I mean, ultimately, I don't know. My expertise have been presenting the ideas of far smarter people than myself. So I'd like to use the money learning from men and boys, and also understanding these things better from a properly non-partisan, evidence-based point of view. Beyond that, I'm not qualified to speak, to be honest. So I'm very apprehensive to go further.
Fair enough. One of the things you said at the very start was that, at least for yourself, you're not trying to ask for the tiny violin. Is that part of the problem here, is that actually when we look at male victims of anything, and the homelessness, the violence, the addiction, that actually there seems to be a cultural lack of violin playing for men. There seems to be a lack of compassion for men. And here's where my slight cynicism comes in to say that, at least from my perspective of it, that is the case. However, and maybe, a lot of that sadly comes from men themselves, that we don't look at ourselves with compassion. We don't look at other men with compassion. We are only trained to look at others who are not straight white guys, let's say, in the Western world, with compassion.
Well, when I say put your violin away, I meant specifically for me, in the
Yeah.
sense that I live a privileged life. Like I do, obviously it's difficult, but I love my life. I love my work. Love having this community. I love the sense of purpose that I achieve and reminded of every single day. So if you want to feel bad for me, then please don't. But I think you're very right in that more men should, well, obviously ask for help and talk about what you're going through. I always think a lot of what I talk about is squeaky wheel gets the oil, to capture it quite well. And more men need to be that squeaky wheel so we can have some oil. And by oil, I mean compassion, funding, support, research, whatever else. But we all know that men are less likely to share what's going on in their life, especially painful experiences. We know men who are being abused are about 2 or 3 times less likely to tell anyone. Obviously, that has a massive detrimental impact to those men primarily, but it also warps our understanding of the more generalized male experience, where because they're not telling us, we don't know. We don't know what men are telling us. I've often been quite cynical of the men's sector, endless encouragement of men to talk, because I appreciate that. But at the same time, a lot of the things men are talking about can't be solved through talking. They need like systemic change. Like a lot of men obviously losing children and family courts, they can't talk the way out of that problem. That comes from systemic change. However, I have slowly learned to change my mind a little bit on that, because if men aren't telling us what's going on, then how can we ever make those changes? So definitely encouraging men to talk, but only if it's followed by the appropriate listening and then, of course, action. There's definitely a secondary impact of men not sharing what's going on, in the sense that it's the missing half of the picture. But at the same time, one of the reasons why men don't talk about experiences of abuse is because they so often rarely see it discussed anywhere. Like if you were to go ahead and Google domestic abuse now, you won't see any men being abused. You won't see it in the news. You won't see it on TV. You won't see it on social media, apart from on my page. So it's hardly surprising that men don't see it themselves when no one else sees it either. So men are just a product of society. So yeah, it's a bit of chicken and egg in that situation. But overall, the more men that can find the words to what they're going through, the better we are to help them. But
The language that you used there and the way you described it, I can hear on a panel with a bunch of women, I can hear one of them saying, that is patriarchy affecting men. That the society that we live in is perpetuating the lack of compassion for men, and it comes from men. And also that when you talked about the media there, and men have traditionally been in charge and running media organizations. You push back against the concept of the patriarchy. Is that a fair way to describe it?
yeah, of course. I think it's quite a low resolution, cartoonish, and increasingly outdated point of view that is very divisive. And I'm not saying there's no truth to it. What I'm saying is that there are way better ways to see the world. There are higher resolution, more delineated, dare I say it, more grown up ways of talking about these issues. And yeah, men built a system. But then we've been talking for half this podcast about domestic violence. And I've seen the gender breakdown of those employed at Refuge UK, and who are the largest and biggest and oldest domestic violence charity on the planet. And it's like 97% women. So if one of the problems we're talking about is men not being adequately helped in abusive relationships, then there was no way you could say men built that system, because women built the domestic violence industry, started that movement. I've even met the woman that started it all. So I'd rather move beyond these divisive political points of view, i.e. the patriarchy, and start to bring back some of the scientific tools of psychology, economics, family violence, anthropology, you name it, that are more precise, higher resolution, testable, and depoliticized, and not divisive. And then we can have the conversations on the pay gap, because we can understand the pay gap so much better if we look at it through economics than we can by just having this really broad, vague, ideological brushstrokes of the patriarchy. So there's just better points of view, and I think we should start using them.
And to circle right back to the start, in the text that I read out quoting yourself back to yourself, you talked about this desire for like tweetable sound
Mm,
bites is what we're kind of talking about, right? We want things that are, in the therapeutic world, it's these 5 things changed my life. If you do these 5 things, and it's like, as a therapist, it's like, no, 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 no. It's not just so easy as just changing 5 things like that, and all of your dreams will come true and all of your problems will be
mhm.
solved. You are requesting of the world and your followers to engage in nuance, in what Richard Reeves, the author of Boys and Men, would say would be holding 2 thoughts in our hands at the same time. It's the yes and that we talked about earlier. I am sad to say that I feel like we're moving further and further away from a world in which nuance and an hour and 10 minutes of a podcast and, you and I sitting here trying to meet with understanding and compassion of issues and also in some disagreement, but meeting somewhere in the middle, that we're moving further away from that. Do you have any belief that this is gonna land? This desire you have to move away from chunks of sound bites that will sound like they'll solve everything?
Yeah, I think I'm a bit more optimistic than you seem to be. I think generally speaking, the landscape of politics is really not great, and it probably is going the opposite way. But in my area of discourse, a lot of the things that I was pelted with eggs for saying 5 years ago are now being talked about quite openly in public and literally in Westminster. And by that I mean the men's health strategy, the Minister for Men, and the Violence Against Men and Boys bill. Those are things that I just suggested. And obviously people were talking about it way before me, but those are fairly benign things to say, and one of them is actually happening. So that shows progress. And I've in my short tenure in this space, I've seen more and more people come out of the woodwork. I've seen conversations happening every day that are similar to what I talk about, that I don't think would have happened like 10 years ago. I don't think Richard Reeves's book of Boys and Men would have been recommended by the President of the United States. By that I mean Obama, 10 years ago. I don't think his book would have received the recognition that it rightly deserves 10 years ago. And yet here we are with both those things. So it is changing, but I agree with you, in the broader political landscape, it does seem to be kind of fucked. But a lot of that might just be the fact that we are seeing things through the prism of social media, which is always amplifying the extremes and the most outrageous takes. So having just taken a 3-week break from social media, I am reminded that the world is a lot better than it looks and it does through this phone. And I recommend more people should do that too.
Are we in some ways pushing back against the men who came before us who didn't have the best interests of men at heart, and the men who still operate in this space and don't have the best interests of men at heart? Your manfluencers, or whatever the current rhetoric to describe them is. I know you don't like the term manosphere, and I understand why, but there are certain men who definitely don't have men's best interest at heart. And what do you say to that, to the people who are trying actively to distort the window through which we see reality?
I mean, I try not to speak too much about them. There are certainly people that I'm happy to scrutinize, but there's also people that thrive off that attention, like those in the manosphere, the Red Pill podcast bros, the Andrew Tates, the Fresh and Fits, and the Pearl Davis and stuff like that, who say, Paul Elam, that say horrendous things. And although I hate them as much as anyone else, I try not to speak about them too much, because that's what feeds them. Like you put a fire out by starving it of oxygen, you don't blow on it. And that's been my frustration with all the discussion around the manosphere, where I feel like the manosphere is sort of dead now, and I think it would be dead had we not blown it up into something that it isn't, because these people, like I said, they feed on controversy, and they're not deserving of our time. So that's one of the cases where I don't want to spend all my time criticizing them, because otherwise I'm just giving them exposure that I don't want them to have, and they already have too much. But I'm very much aware of who these people are, and I try to spend my time building a space that I hope is a healthier, although still unapologetic conversation as positive about men, and unafraid to say things that need to be said, but then isn't built on a bed of misogyny and actual sexism. So I try to just set an example rather than come down on them with fire and brimstone, although often I do that as well.
Mm. To end, what would be your advice to a young guy who is circling that drain, so to speak, and is being pulled in? Because I hate to say it, those guys are way better than me at content creation. These guys are experts at doing it regularly and frequently and with vitriol.
Mhm.
So if there is someone out there who is maybe a Tin Man follower and also a follower of some of these guys, because the sad thing is that me and you and them overlap on many issues, but also are very
Mm.
far away on others. What is your advice to those people about how to escape that mentality? Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, nuance is very important. I mean, I know full well how to go viral, and it is by making bombastic, really easy to digest, highly shareable pieces of content that are completely opposite to what is actually a fair point of view. Like, one of the things that the Red Pill Bros talk about is like false allegations of rape, which is obviously extremely controversial. They'll say something stupid and narrow-minded but shareable, and it will get, millions and millions of hits. Whereas I've done posts on this issue, and it's like 20 slides long. It presents dozens of different studies, and it's very obviously a lot of grey area, and it doesn't do well at all. And I know it won't do well, and that's fine. As for advice, I mean, I often do public talks now, and almost every time, normally a middle-aged woman who's a mum taps him on the shoulder afterwards and asks him for his advice, and she'll say, "Well, my son is watching Andrew Tate. What do I do?" And my first thing I want to make sure is like, please don't lecture him. And often they already have. And I'm like, as soon as you start lecturing him and wagging your finger, is the moment you've probably lost him. So I'd encourage any parent to ask without judgment, why is your boy watching these things? What is he getting from them? And are there other places he can find it, healthier places, maybe my own, that can give him that sense of understanding that isn't built on misogyny? And to the boys themselves, I gave you advice from my dad, and now I'll give you some advice from my mum. And she always said everything in moderation. She was a nutritionist, so she's obviously saying it about like fruit and veg, but everything in moderation. I wouldn't recommend people just follow me and accept everything I say as the single complete truth. I am just one page in what I hope is a massive saga of knowledge, including people that are diametrically opposed to me, including people that I've criticized, that in total, the sum total of that being a really broad encyclopedic knowledge of this very contentious area of advocacy. So I want to see a bit of me, I want to see a bit of Movember, I want to see a bit of some of the feminist charities, maybe even Zach, like Richard Reeves. Like, I just want to be one single page. I don't want to be the sum total of all knowledge. So, and no one can ever claim to be. So I'd say even Andrew Tate has some pearls of wisdom, dare I say it.
If people do, after an hour or so of conversation and they haven't switched off and they do want to find you, where do they find you?
Oh, TheTinMen on Instagram. Although I've got a website that hopefully will be up by the time this comes out, thetinmen.blog, but through my Instagram you can find everything you need. And that's still the centerpiece of all of my content. So yeah, TheTinMen, all one word, on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much, George. And I look forward to more of your work making the rounds and hopefully getting more exposure because it's needed. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Lovely to be here, and good luck on such a worthwhile journey. I can't wait to hear more about it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to No Man's an Island. If you enjoyed this, please share, like, and subscribe so more people can join in the conversation. This podcast is powered by Men's Therapy Hub, where you'll find more resources, support, and a directory of male therapists for male clients. Don't forget to follow our Instagram and TikTok at Men's Therapy Hub. The music is by the Swedish artist Reindeer, spelled Raindear. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.